Here's that we're recording everywhere.
Okay, good.
That's a good start.
Well, here's the start. How did you get into racing? Now, somehow, reason or another, I want to say you were friends with the Rudds or something close to that?
Yeah, my dad knew Ricky's dad
Oh, okay.
and business
Yeah.
and stuff. And when I got my driver's license, Ricky's dad had built Ricky's brother, AJ, a dune buggy, a fiberglass dune buggy. He was actually, Ricky's brother, AJ, was actually working after school in a fiberglass place. And they had all the molds, and he actually ran the chopper gun building boats and dune buggy bodies. So he had built his own.
Yeah.
So my dad went ahead and we got one, and I built one for myself. And then AJ and I just got to be like best buddies then, and we were inseparable all through then. And then I believe it was in 74. It was July 74, and AJ came to, we was both working at the dad's junkyard out there at Alrod Auto Parts. And Ricky was driving the delivery truck, and me sometimes right there. But anyway, AJ says, I want to go to Daytona to watch the race. I said, man, that's like watching paint dry. I said, I ain't going there to watch no race. I said, he said, well, I really would like to go. I said, man, that's boring, sit in the stand. I can't sit in the stands for no 4 or 5 hours, 3 or 4 hours, something like that. I said, I'll go if we can get in the pits or something, but I ain't going to go just sit in those stands. He said, well, call your cousin and see if he can get you in. So I called Bill Champion, and yeah, I'll get you in. So we got down there and started watching him work on the car and stuff like that. I mean, he got us right in the garage, because back then he only had like one guy with him, and we're working around. And after watching him a while, finally I came over and I was like, this guy was adjusting the valves on the motor, and I said, Bill, I said, I ain't trying to be a smart butt or nothing. I said, that guy adjusting the valves don't know what he's doing. I said, you're going to blow the motor up. He's like, well, do you know how to do it? I go, well, yeah. Well, he told that guy, get out of the way. Let him in there. So I adjusted the valves, and then he was going to get Jim Hurtubise. He brought him over there to try and qualify the car, to get him in the race. And Jim was in the car the next day, and he went to back out of the garage, and they used to run, before they came up with all these Heim joints and universal joints in the steering, he had one of those old rubber biscuits, one of those rag joints, they call them, back like out of a streetcar, is all they were. And he went to back out of the garage, and that thing turned, and it broke in two, and the steering wheel spun around in his hand. Well, he's lucky it happened there. So he's like, man, they were just standing there looking at each other, and AJ and I are like, well, do you got one to replace it? Yeah, I got one in the truck. So we ran over and grabbed it and replaced it, and we got back to the motel that night, and Bill offered me a job.
I'll be darned.
So I just started racing, and I was working at the junkyard, and I was making $125 a week working at the junkyard. So was AJ back then, and Ricky.
Now,
and
is
all.
this in Virginia?
This is up in Virginia.
Okay. What
Yep.
part?
We all grew up. Around Chesapeake, Virginia Beach area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right there.
I'm from there.
Yeah.
So-
Yep. So we did that, and next thing you know, AJ, he was coming on the weekends and coming at nighttime sometimes to help me pack the bearings and doing everything, because it was only me and Bill. When we were there that day at Daytona, they made the race, and Hurtubise ran just a couple of laps, and Bill was one of the first guys that had the small block, the 351 from Bud Moore.
Right.
He had one, and it busted a cylinder wall a couple of laps in the race. So we get back, and I'm just started working there, and he goes, well, got to build a motor. I got a block coming in tomorrow and everything. So here I am. I'm a motor builder, which I had built some drag motors and stuff, but just street stuff. And I wasn't really a race motor builder, but I was now. Just all of a sudden like that. I mean, I was bearing packer, motor builder, truck loader, truck driver. You know how it is when you work for the independents back then.
Yeah.
Now, how long did you stay with Bill?
That started in July. I stayed with him through that year, and then the next year, Ricky's dad and I was talking to him into letting Ricky drive the car. They actually took the car over to Langley Field, his old Mercury that he had, the 71 Mercury, and AJ drove it and Ricky drove it. And Ricky drove it. They drove just about the same, and Ricky might have been just a couple of thousandths faster than AJ, but Ricky was just like that. Ricky always had that natural born talent. AJ could drive as good as him, but he had to get there to do it. Where Ricky, he'd run fast right off the bat.
Yeah.
So they went ahead and let Ricky drive the car the next year. So I stayed there most of 75 with him.
So what was it like for you being a young guy at that time and working for a young guy who was young in his racing career?
Well, we didn't really look at it that way. I mean, we had already all grown up with each other, so we were just friends, and it's like one time I was eating at a restaurant here on the lake, and Ricky and I were eating lunch. And I had my boat behind Midtown, my big charter boat that I ran, and my phone rang, and some guy wanted to know if I had a date available. I said, well, I'll be right back. And I ran down the boat to get my planner to see if I had the day available. And I'm coming back, and the waiter comes over. He says, Cliff, he said, I can't believe you just left Ricky Rudd sitting there like that. I said, he'd have done the same thing to me. I mean, we're just friends. It's just Ricky to me. It's like everybody else, like Richard Petty or somebody they're a big giant. And to us that worked in the industry, it's just Richard.
Yeah.
And just Ricky, stuff like that.
What all did you do for the Rudds? I mean, we were jack of all trades like a were with Bill?
Well, yeah. I mean, because I was the only one that really had experience in there. So I was packing all the wheel bearings and doing everything. And they had Ray Fox was building the motors down here. And we'd had a little motor trouble. And we decided to bring them home and build them ourselves. And I was already keeping the whole car up and everything. So I took a piece of paper and wrote down on there, I wanted like 3.5 thousandths clearance on the rod bearings and 4 thousandths on the mains. And I wanted 18 thousandths end gap on the rings and stuff like that. I went in and handed it to AJ and said, here, you build. I said, I can't do it all. You got to build the motors. So then he built the motors and I did the rest of the car.
How about that?
And Ricky helped out where he could,
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned 74 you worked for Bill.
Mm-hmm.
75, Ricky was running the car. And you mentioned that you stayed there most of 75 or through 75.
Yeah.
What happened then?
We were running at a race. We had a trouble with the valve, had a bent valve or something like that, and had to replace it. And Ricky's dad, which I guess he was supplying money, probably buying tires, through the junkyard, was sponsoring a little bit. And Bill went and got a valve. Instead of getting a racing valve, he needed it quick and cheap, so he just went down to the dealership and bought a valve. And him and Ricky's dad had a big argument about it and everything. Well, they got out there, and Ricky, they dropped a valve during the race at Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
So Alvin was so mad and everything, that was it. So he just pulled out. And that was the end of him driving, so I went and got a job for James Hylton then. That's when I started with James right there. And it's funny because when I went to work for James, I was living in a little trailer beside the shop right there. And actually, one time me and Kurt Shelmerdine were living in this little trailer beside the shop. It's probably about an 18, 20-foot trailer with one living on one end and one living on the other. So, that's an experience working for James.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what kind of a boss was he?
He was a great boss.
I thought that.
But it was a never-ending job with James. I mean, he built all the motors, and myself and all the volunteer guys around town kept the car up. But James didn't know anything about quitting time. I mean, you had to be at work at 8 o'clock the next morning, but you might be out there till 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's whatever it took. You just had to get the car ready. And sometimes you only had a couple of days to turn, because back then you only had 1 or 2 cars. So you're lucky if you had 2 cars. So we would wreck a car. We wrecked a car at Talladega and drove straight from there to Banjo Shop. Had to put a front clip on. It's when he T-boned Marty Robbins. The only race we didn't finish that year. We finished 3rd in the points. And that's the only race we didn't finish, is when he T-boned Marty right there. I think Marty wrecked or spun or something and came down, and James T-boned him right there. And the Talladega car, we had to run it the next weekend in Bristol, which is nowadays unheard of. You're not going to run your Bristol car and your Talladega car. They're long ways apart. They're a little different from each other. And we went there and worked around the clock for 2 or 3 days. I mean, we'd be working in Banjo Shop, and all his guys, everybody's sitting there working, and you'd be in there working, and you needed a part of the truck, and you'd grab the flashlight and walk outside, and the sun's up. It's the middle of the day. You just lose track of days, because we worked at least 2 days straight. But we made it the next weekend. We were at Bristol with that same, it was Nashville. No. We were there with that same car.
Yeah, that kind of workload might make a fellow think about moving on.
Well, it did when you're young and dumb. It and you and I guess I got to say I never was a real big race fan, but I loved working on them, and I loved the people and stuff. So I enjoyed working on them. So good thing, or I'd have probably quit.
Did you now help the chronology here? Did you shift over to Richard Childress after James, or not?
Yeah, I came and worked for Richard in '77. I worked for Richard, and I left the middle of the season. Ricky and them were running for Rookie of the Year, and they needed some help, so I quit about halfway through the season. Right there in June, I think it was, when Richard came back from Riverside. He'd gone out to race out there, and I quit when I left when he came back, and went back to work for Ricky and them to help them get through the Rookie of the Year deal.
Now, we know what Richard Childress Racing eventually became.
Yeah.
1977, when you went to work there, what was Richard Childress Racing like at that point?
Oh, it was a little shop on Walltown Street, and just a bunch of volunteer guys. Just a small shop. We had a box truck and a open trailer behind us, like most of the guys did back then. Cecil Gordon, there, that's what everybody had, was a box truck back then and an open trailer back there. But he's mostly volunteer help. I mean, he had his own motor room, so he was ahead of a lot of the guys. He had actually mechanics that built the motors for him and stuff, instead of like James built his own. But then there was a lot of guys around town that volunteered, and actually Patterson. Patterson works for him now, still works for him, and he was volunteer help, would come in the shop, help at night, and there was a local policeman around there, and I can't remember these guys' names for anything, but he would come in, he'd be on duty, and he'd drive by the shop, and he'd come in there, and we might need a hand cutting a piece of rod or something for a window net or something like that, and he's over in there with his guns and his uniform on, and he's over at the vice cutting metal. Just anybody come by, you just jump in and help, whatever it took to get the job done.
Wow. I did not become involved in the sport until the late 80s. The impression that I always got of the NASCAR in the mid 70s, early 80s was it was almost like the Wild Wild West. It was kind of everybody did their thing and they were having a good time on the road, and it was I don't want to say a free for all, but it was a good time.
It was a great time. I mean, it was actually wilder before then. Maybe when I came into it, it was actually toning down some, because it was starting to get known, and you couldn't do the things you used to do. I mean, I heard all the stories. Everybody's heard all the stories with Curtis Turner and all those guys back in the day and stuff. And I know my cousin Bill, they were staying at the Thunderbird Motel there in Darlington. And a couple of drivers went over and knocked on his door and talked him they drug him down the motel somewhere. And while he was down, a couple more went in there, and they had one of those sprinklers out in the yard that goes back and forth that waters your yard. They stuck it in his room. It was out there where they were watering the lawn. They stuck it in his room. And he came back, and I mean, the bed was soaking wet. All his clothes were soaking wet. Everything in the whole room, walls, ceiling, everything was soaking wet in that room. But they were all a bunch of jokesters. Everybody did back then. And like I said, it was wilder, like I said, before that, because they would, you'd hear where G.C. Spencer, he always had a pistol stuck under the seat of the race car, even when he's on there, because those guys used to have bill collectors, or used to have people come to them, they knew they was at the racetrack, and they'd confront them right there. Yeah. Well, they kept a gun in the car with them. 2 or 3 of them did that. So the days before that were really the Wild West, and it still was a sort of a free-for-all when we were there. I really enjoyed the part of it because, at 21, 22 years old, when Ricky and them started, who would have thought that some kids that young, and Ricky was 3 years younger. Ricky's brother and I, AJ, were the same age, and Ricky was 3 years younger than us, and he just give us cash and a credit card or whatever and a truck and trailer, and we'd go to California. We'd go all over the country like that couple 20-year-old kids, and now that I'm married and have them kids that were in their 20s, I don't hardly trust them to go to 7-Eleven. I can imagine going across country with it like that. Just here you go.
Wow. Well, in '78, you were still back to Childress, I think, or because you were listed as a screw chief, right?
Yeah. Is
that how you got you back?
It could have been. Let's see. It could have been '78. I tell you, I have a hard time remembering the years right there because I went back to Hylton at one time.
Yeah.
And then I went to Richard. But I don't say how, because in '77 he won the Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
And it could have been right along there.
Yeah, you're listed as the crew chief in 78.
78? Okay.
Now,
I know
did he
79 I went to work for Grant Adcox
Yes.
and ran that season with him.
Yeah. Now, in 78 with Richard, did he get you, lure you back by saying, you'll be my crew chief? Or
No, I mean,
you just went, yeah.
Tim Brewer had just left.
Ah.
And he needed somebody to fill that slot. So he hired me to do that.
Now I know that Richard Childress and James Hylton, they were pretty tight as fellow independents. Was it almost a deal where Richard needed some help, so you went and helped him, and then James needed some help, and you went?
No, I was in between. I guess I had left Ricky and them where, money got tight or whatever, things happened, and you left and went, because they weren't going to run some or something like that, and I needed a job, so I went over and I'd go back to James or something. And the second time I went back to James is when Kurt Shelmerding was there, and he and I shared that little trailer.
Yeah. Okay.
But at one time, the first time, I think I lived in James's house right there. Because Evelyn used to, she'd cook me breakfast and stuff like that, and her hanging out was a real plus. Actually have home-cooked meals.
Now, I have always heard that RC and James had a bit of a relationship where they would kind of pick at each other a little bit.
All the time.
All the time.
What's your best James Hylton RC picking on each other's story?
Well,
I know one, but I can't tell it.
Exactly. I'm trying to think.
We talked about it on the podcast.
Really, the only best one that I know, I can't tell. The short of it, we had both headed to California.
That's the one.
We were going to California and had both gone the middle route, going across 40. And everybody had left at separate times, and it kind of passed through the same towns. And, didn't even know where the other person was. And we had stopped in El Paso and got a burger or something. And when we came out on the ramp, here he came right up beside us. You couldn't have timed it if you'd have tried. Pull right up beside us coming off the ramp right there in El Paso. But those two were something else. They used to lock each other in the back of the trailer when they had the driver's meeting. Back then you didn't get fined for missing the driver's meeting and stuff. You just missed the driver's meeting. And that's why they had to start finding stuff, making them show up. But they would catch them in there changing clothes or doing something, and they'd padlock the back door, lock them in the trailer, something like that.
Well, you went to work for Grant Adcox, and there were others.
I went to work for Grant Adcox, and when I got there, he had a car, and he had it switched over to an Oldsmobile. So when they were changing over to the downs, changing the cars, and he called me, and it was only about 4 or 5 days before he had to go to Daytona. And he had just gotten the car back from Hall & Moody. They had changed the roll cage over, put the sheet metal on it for an Oldsmobile. And he needed me to get the car ready to go to Daytona. So I got there, and the motor was sitting over here and everything, and all he had was like 2 volunteer guys. And we had like 3 or 4 days just to get this car together, set up for Daytona, and get to Daytona. And we ended up working. We worked around the clock for it's either 2 or 3 days, getting that car ready to go, and then got in the truck and drove to Daytona to race down there. And actually, one of Ricky Rudd, one of the boys he went to school with, Joel Stewart, he came down and helped me get the car ready and helped us drive and stuff to Daytona. But that was something, and we qualified real well down there. I think he was getting motors from Waddell or somebody, and we qualified I think they were on the pole. I think Waddell and them were on the pole, and we qualified about 4th or something like that.
Really?
Or 4th or 6th. It was somewhere in the top 6, I believe. It might have been 4th.
Really?
We know what happened with Grant
Yeah.
in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So that's all that a lot of people tend to know these days. If they know of Grant Adcox, they know what happened.
Right.
Who was the Grant Adcox that you knew?
Oh, great guy. One of the best guys you'd ever want to meet.
Yeah.
Just fun to be around. he was the life of the party. When you came around, he had everybody laughing, carrying on. You know, there was a local band, Bill McCauley and the Bluegrass Express, that were friends of his, and he put their name on the back of the car for free. You know, just stuck it across the back of the spoiler back there. So we'd go, you know, during the week, we'd go down. They'd be playing at the local saloon down there or something. We'd go down there and get a couple pictures of beer and listen to them guys play. But Grant was right in there with you. Now, his dad and everybody, his whole family was just super nice people. Some of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. Right there. I really miss Grant. You know, like I said, he was a great guy to be around, fun to be with.
During this period of time, we're talking from like 77, 78, all the way up through the early 80s.
Yeah.
You talked about the huge amount of work you guys did, and you did it because you loved it. But at the same time, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. Were you making any money? Did you have?
No.
I was going to say, what was your biggest paycheck?
Well,
if you want to tell me.
Back to like Ricky, when Ricky started, we actually started racing.
Mm-hmm.
I might have only been making $95 or $100 a week when we were actually working in the junkyard, in the
That's
salvage
about
yard.
what you paid me when I started.
And then when we started racing, we were working day and night.
Yeah.
And AJ and I both made $125 a week, and Alvin said he was going to pay Ricky $150 because he was driving the car. He was taking the chances and everything, driving the car. So the driver got $150 a week, and we got $125. Now, I think I worked for the same thing for Childress and stuff. And then when Grant, at the end of 79, his dad said they had to cut back and they were going to sit out of racing for a while. So I came back. Well, I didn't come back home. Actually, we'd been getting our motors from Waddell, like I said, with Grant. So Grant talked to Waddell and told him what was going on, and he told him that I was leaving. So Waddell actually hired me right there at the end of the season. So I went to work for Waddell for $15,000 a year, which wasn't a whole lot. It was still about 100, maybe 150, 125, still about the same thing right there. And I did that.
Now, is that when he was at Rainier?
Yeah, he was at Rainier with Buddy Baker driving.
Right,
and
right.
Like I came over there.
That car was a missile.
I left at the end of the year. Matter of fact, I had a van, and I worked till 11 o'clock that night getting Grant's stuff all together and everything for him. Went home and packed everything in the van and left about 6 o'clock in the morning and headed for Charlotte to work for Waddell. And I called him along the way, and he said, well, we're leaving for Thanksgiving right now, and everything, just be back Monday. So I stopped. Just happened to know a girl that lived in Atlanta. She used to live over by Grant. She had moved to Atlanta, so I stopped and spent the night with her and some friends in Atlanta. Went to a Harry Chapin concert.
I'll be darned.
That night, yep. And he passed away. I believe the next year is when he was in his wreck, passed away. But anyway, did that and started working for him then. Right there, the very first race we go to, we won the Daytona 500. And that was the first thing, you know, with CBS with the cameras and everything.
Right,
and
right.
we were pitted right below the camera stand right there. Well, I'm sitting there. I'm a young kid. I'm still in my 20s right there, mid-20s by then. And Ricky's brother AJ calls me up. He says, hey, I seen you out there on pit road. He said, you was in there changing the front tire. I said, well, how'd you know it was me? He said, I could tell by that bald spot on the back of your head. I go, what bald spot? I didn't know I had no bald spot. Well, the TV, you know, with the sunlight shining through it, you could see right down through there. First time I ever learned I had a bald spot right there. Which it ain't a little bald spot no more.
What was it like after working for James Hylton and Richard Childress and Grandad Cox, and all of a sudden you do find yourself in Victory Lane for the Daytona 500? What was that like?
It's hard to describe the feeling you get when you go to Victory Circle for the first time. I mean, I was nobody on the crew. I was a tire changer, but I mean, at the shop, I was just one of the mechanics. I was nobody. And still, it was a big thrill right there. And a lot of people don't realize, you know, when you're going to Victory Circle, if you see some of the pictures from back then, and somebody just had it on Facebook the other day, is, you know, Victory Circle at Daytona is a little hard to get to. You kind of got to know how to get there. You're kind of going through the fences and through the sand, and you're pushing the car through sand down through there. And we make it through one fence. Well, Buddy, he's got, you know, you got 100 people crowded around the car, and the crowd, you're trying to make it up through there, and he can't see because everybody's all around the car right there. So I'm pushing on the A-pillar right there by the windshield. I got my arm in there, and I'm driving the car up through there while Buddy, we're running up through there, and Waddell was right in front of me pushing on the front fender. Well, somewhere in that sand, Waddell tripped.
Uh-oh.
And when he did, it looked like a centipede. We just, all the way, he went and we spit him out the back. The whole line of people down the side of that car just walked over top of Waddell. You can't stop. And I was holding on the wheel. I couldn't let go. So he went down, and everybody, like that, it was just a big hump going down through there, and spit him out the back. He got up, run on back up there. But that was really something. My dad, probably like most kids, I mean, he didn't really promote racing because my dad sponsored Bill at the local, at Moyock. They had the dog track down there, and he actually went down and helped them change it into a racetrack and everything. He owned a fence company and helped them do a lot of that work. But it was something, seeing all that and doing all that. To go from that, my dad, like I said, he didn't support it a whole lot because he saw from what he did with Bill that there was no money in racing. He said, we're paying $50 a tire and having to put new tires on the car, and if you win, you won $75. He said, so I could see it was a money-losing proposition. So he really discouraged me the whole time with racing and stuff right there. And after we got to Vickers Circle at Daytona, I came home, and my dad actually took me around to his buddies and introduced me.
Really?
His best friend then had a hot dog stand. That's my son Cliff. Yeah, they just won Daytona and stuff like that. And it was like I was accepted because he'd pretty much, like you'll never amount to anything, as long as you're doing this and everything. And it finally did right there.
That's great.
And I was lucky that he was at Charlotte when with Benny Parson. We won the pole there. And we won the little truck and the Broncos and stuff like that. And he was there when we took the picture and did all that. So it turned out good in the end.
Having been with the independent teams, more than likely you weren't going to win.
Right.
You go to Rainier Racing, you win the Daytona 500. Did it become a deal where after that you expected to win every race?
You wanted to.
Yeah.
It just depends. I mean, sometimes you don't always have a choice with the team you're with. It's being a crew chief can be a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Because there's only 40 openings for a crew chief in the industry.
Yeah.
And then when those 40 are full, you're the odd man out.
Right.
Where if you're a crew person, there's thousands of those out there every week. Somebody can always fill in, but you can't, a crew chief's not going to say, hey, come in, why don't you just come take my job?
Right.
So it changes things a little bit. But you do want to win. You try to, you do the best you can at it, but at the same time, you have to be realistic in your expectations.